So did leading inclusively come naturally to you? And what actions did you take to personally develop a more inclusive leadership style? Who'd like to go with that one first?
Well, I'm happy
Thanks,
to
David.
have a chat. I mean, armies exist on teamwork, and while the team hasn't been as diverse and inclusive as it is now, absolutely, organisations like armies, like police forces, a lot of uniformed forces, absolutely inculcate from the moment of your entry into the organisation the idea that you're part of a team. And that's how it functions best. But it functions much better if you introduce the idea of diversity of thinking. That's the real Rubicon that organisations cross. Diversity, for diversity's sake, is simply box ticking. You know, we're okay because we've got X number of women or X number of men and women from the LGBTI community. You know, great, that's fantastic. We don't need to worry about this anymore. Inclusivity is all about listening to other people's perspectives and their views. You don't have to agree with them, by the way. You have to be able to listen to them with respect, though. And so the journey that the Army went on was initially about diversity, and not box ticking per se, but tackling what was for me the first big challenge, which was to grow the number of women in the organisation. And we set a target and we named it publicly, and that was a really important step because a lot of policies and directives got put in place to better attract women to the idea of committing to army service and then offering them reasons to stay. But the big step was understanding that you needed to be inclusive, because when you were inclusive, you started to get the real power that diversity brings, which is diversity of thinking. And I took to saying to the Army workforce, which was overwhelmingly male and young, hey, listen, the reason we're doing this is not to, tick the feel-good factor here. The reason we're doing it is because armies exist to outthink our adversary. And when we don't outthink our adversary, really bad stuff happens. And so how do we outthink the challenges that we will be faced with? We don't do it by simply saying the only ideas of value can possibly come from him, because he is who he is, white and Anglo-Saxon and a member of the prevailing tribe. If you can break down that line of thinking and start to say, you know, her idea has provided a very different perspective here. It's focused on issues that we hadn't thought of before. But if we put them in place, then we are going to see real advantages accrue to what the team can achieve. That changes the conversation, even in a male-dominated institution like the Army. And while we certainly didn't create Camelot, and we've got a long way to go, I think that there was a fundamental cultural change. Because, you know, we've talked about inclusion and exclusion, and we've just heard Di tell that great anecdote about being excluded. It's about the culture of the organisation that actually sets the ground rules for being included or excluded. And when you tackle culture, particularly from a capability point of view, in a professional sense, I think real traction starts to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And your point is a good one, David, because looking at, you know, is it a natural thing to be an inclusive leader? But your answer there also talks about the constructs of an organisation or an entity as well. If its culture is not naturally inclusive, how do you consciously bring that in? How do you build the capability to be more inclusive as well?
So I've just concluded a couple of sessions with the Western Australian Department of Health in Perth, and it was really great. They're doing some really good work. But I found myself at one stage at the start of an address referencing Thucydides, an ancient Greek historian from the Peloponnesian War, fought between Sparta and Athens. I know I'm telling you something that you're already deeply interested in. Between Sparta and Athens, you know, 400 years before the birth of Christ. And well, you know, the reason I've just ducked back there is because Thucydides, you know, or 3 millennium ago, said there are 3 things that impel human nature: fear, self-interest, and honour. And I don't think that we've changed all that much as a species. The things that you really, you know, when you talk about inclusivity, you're talking about that last one, honour, which I think you can now juxtapose to mean values. And organisations that have got values that are inclusive, courage in our case, initiative, yes, teamwork, absolutely, and then a 4th value that we introduced as part of the leadership team in the Army in 2013, respect, that changes a lot of conversations. I'm going to listen to you because I understand that I've got a value to live to here. It's about respect. I may not agree with your point of view, but I'm going to respect your right to say it. And over a relatively short space of time, people start to learn things that they haven't heard before, see issues that they hadn't heard before, hear voices that they hadn't heard before. And so I think that you can make fundamental changes to your organisation without necessarily referencing ancient Greeks, by realising that you can appeal to the better part of human nature, but if you couch the conversation in being more professional, being more capable, understanding the true advantages of diversity, you'll probably move the dial quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. So, Di, what do you think? The concept of being naturally inclusive, does that come naturally to you? And to what degree? But what are the things that you've done? What actions, behaviours have you put in place to become a more inclusive leader? Because that's the helpful stuff for us.
Right back to being a little kid, you're very much in your own little shell, and I'm sure many of you have got children, and I watch my grandchildren, and they have, it's all about them. And they don't really think, what are them like? What are their things, with their strengths? How do they think? How do they do things differently? And I get fascinated watching my grandchildren, 6 of them, all very different, all kind of working along. But I really, as I got more self-aware, as I got into situations where I could either get profiles or people gave me feedback, I realised there are some particular characteristics that I exude quite strongly, very strongly. I'm very curious. I'm very fast-paced. I like to get things done. I love to make, you know, if I've got a list of things to get done, a good day is every one of them listed and every one of them checked off. But as you become more self-aware, and as you say, diversity of thought, you realise that this can lead to some problems. So one of them I affectionately call is this idea that I'm the kind of person that could leap off the building and forget to strap on the parachute before I take that final jump. So what I've learnt through various self-awareness techniques is that I need to surround myself with people for whom process and procedure and reflection are really important skills for them. Different ways of thinking about things, different approaches, things that slow me down and force me to reflect. And as I've become more aware and done a lot more study on the different styles of people and what motivates different people and the uniqueness of each person, then I have learnt that this diversity, exactly as you say, and it's not about any one diversity factor, it is the diversity of thought and the diversity of activity and playing to people's strengths. And if you can bring teams together that bring these strengths together, then you go a long way in that direction. And another very quick example that I learned, I found that if I interview someone, we all make assumptions about people in the first 10 seconds. I can be sitting there with a half-hour interview planned, and in 5 minutes it's like, how am I going to escape from this? What's going to happen here? You know, I've got to go away. And what I took to doing was always bringing a second person who was very different to me into the room. And my special favourite was my HR director, who used to read my signals extraordinarily well and immediately take over some of the questioning and give some really nice open questions that would allow this person that hadn't knocked me off my feet in the first 10 seconds to provide some much better input on their skills and what they might have thought about bringing to the organisation. And I also learnt things like, in finance, you don't need another person like me. It's really dangerous. Or in legal, I had a legal woman who would just sit there. I'd come up with some great idea and she'd say, well, that's going to put you in trouble with the law for this, and this reason. And I learnt that the answer was to go and speak to her and say, these are the kind of outcomes I'm looking for. Can you have a bit of a think about it? And when you've had time, come back and suggest some ways we might go about achieving those outcomes whilst maintaining a lawful business that we were operating. And when I did that and I gave her the time to reflect, which doesn't mean, if you're like me, sitting beside her, tapping on the table, well, have you got the answer yet? You know, have you got an answer? It was me realising that an instant answer may not be the best answer, but to step right out of the situation, give her time to talk to 2 or 3 other people, and then bring to me a fabulous solution. And I feel very proud that when we won Employer of the Year in the year 2000, our engagement level was 90% at Apple. Most organisations are pretty happy if they're over 50%. And that meant only 10% of the people who worked within Apple Australia at that time were not totally committed to our vision and our values and where we were taking the company. But there was a lot of learning to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you've both given us some good ideas about, I guess at first, a reality check, that inclusive leadership isn't something that anyone is born into. And if we look at, you know, it's interesting with children, if a lot of people in the room probably do have kids, actually there are some kids that you watch and you go, they do have some natural instincts. You can choose the natural leaders. But it's not to say that every person that's in a leadership role in corporate Australia or business Australia or any part of Australia today, most leaders probably are not born and probably haven't even developed those skills. It is a conscious awareness. There is a journey. There's feedback required. There's profiling you can do. There's some, humility involved in the process, I'm sure.